All right, so what we're showing you here is a broken spring. So when a spring is tensioned, it is one piece. When that spring breaks, the amount that it grows, when you wind a spring, it actually increases in length. So when the spring breaks, you'll see that gap between the broken pieces, which will expose the shaft. What happens when a spring breaks, if it's a single car garage door, it has one spring. So cables will have no tension. They will be off the drum and slack. So you'll see when you come out to your garage and it won't lift, the opener will lift it up 3 inches and then it won't be able to continue. It's because it doesn't have enough strength to lift the door because the spring is broken and not adding that tension needed. So you'll come out, you'll find 2 loose cables, door will be flat on the ground. That's your indication you have a broken spring. If it's a double door, you'll see 1 broken spring, the other one, chances are, is in good shape. So either way, when you're changing a double spring change, you always want to change both springs. They've done the exact same amount of work, just like the brakes on the front of your car. You don't change one brake without the other. Same with springs. When you have 2 springs in your door, you change both. Here we're going to explain and show you how to change a spring on a single garage door with 1 spring. So Avery's walking up to the garage door here. He's going to the left-hand side because as you can see in the video, there's more room to work on the left-hand side in this situation than the right. Now, if there was no room on the left, we could still do it on the right. We'd have to do a bit more work taking it off, but you always want to go to the path of least resistance. So he's going to take off the left side. He's going to unbolt the bearing plate, as you'll see in the video, undo the set screws on the drum. That's where you use your 3/8 12-point socket. And you'll see in the video he'll loosen off the drum and he'll slide the bearing plate off and then the drum in preparation for removing the spring. Okay, now that everything is loose and unbolted, Avery's going to go ahead and take off the bearing plate, and then he's going to file the burrs on the shaft where the set screws put indentations in the shaft. So he's going to file that nice and smooth so that he can easily remove the drum, and also he'll be able to easily remove the bearing plate, the center bearing bracket, and the spring without binding. Avery is now removing the spring, so he's unbolting the spring from the bearing plate. He's going to then slide off the bearing and the spring. In some situations, the bearing plate in the center is solid all the way around, so you cannot remove the shaft from it. So in that case, you'd have to unbolt the bearing plate and slide it off the shaft as well. If there's more room on the right-hand side, then you don't have to remove the bearing plate because you can take the spring off to the right-hand side. But in our situation, because we're going to the left, we have more room there to work. Avery's now going to go back to the left-hand side where we're going to remove the spring and get ready to put the new spring on. So bearing plate comes off, spring comes off. All right, now Avery's going to grab the spring and we're going to install that on the shaft. Do not forget your bearing. We're going to put the spring on, then the bearing, then the drum, and then the end bearing plate. Now he's going to put the bolts back into the end bearing plate and set it. Those bolts on the end bearing plate will either be 1/2 inch or 7/16. Avery is now putting the bolts back in on the mounting side of the cone to fasten it to the center bearing plate. Make sure that the bearing is in the spring saddle. Avery is now installing the cable on the drum. It is important to install the left-hand cable first. It will allow for the door to be properly leveled once the tension is put back on the spring. And he's going to vice grip the shaft to the back framing or to the lumber behind. What that does is locks the shaft in place so that he can go to the opposite side. He can set the cable now on the right-hand side on the drum, and then he can reapply the tension to the spring. So you want to first set your left-hand drum, lock it in with your ratchet, lock the shaft to the wall with your vice grips, then go to the right-hand side in this case, tighten the right-hand drum, and get ready to add tension back to your spring. Because the shaft is locked with the vice grip to the wall or to the backdrop, now he can add tension to that by hand and tighten up the set screws on the drum so that now both cables are tight, hand tight, and now what we have to do is reapply the tension to the spring. The door that we're working on is a 7-foot high door, and it's standard lift, which means it turns right at the header. So he's going to apply 30 quarter turns, 29 to 30 quarter turns. We're going to test to make sure that that door balances once we're done, and it's important that the door stops and balances at our waist. We'll show you that once we're done. Right now we're going to go ahead and add 7.5 full turns to the spring and get the tension back on the door. Once you've wound the spring the proper amount of times, which in this case is 29 quarter turns, we're going to tap the spring over to give it a little bit of slack so that it doesn't bind on itself when the door runs, which will make a clunking noise. Now we're going to go and remove the vice grips from the door, and we're going to test the door by hand before hooking up the garage door opener. We're going to test it for proper balance. The door should stay right at his waist level. That shows proper balance. If the door goes up past it, so if you let it go at your waist and the door goes up, then you have too much tension on the spring. And same thing if you hold the door at your waist and it closes, then you don't have enough tension on the spring. So that fine-tune adjustment can be made. If you have 29, 30 quarter turns on a 7-foot high door and it flies up or slams down, you 100% have the wrong spring. And now we're going to go ahead and reconnect the garage door opener to the door, and you've successfully completed your spring change.